community. Thanks for the warning. All right, delegations. We have Mr. Leonardo Gill, Project Manager, Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan, and is here to give us an update and certainly a PowerPoint presentation on the up-to-date Windsor-Essex Regional Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. Mr. Gill, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Mr. Mayor. I'll just wait a second for the PowerPoint to go on your screen. Perfect. Yes, so again, good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Thank you very much for having me today to provide that project update, as well as discuss some of the key findings thus far. Next slide, please. Before moving forward, I wanted to emphasize that actually, much like the photo on the slide, the CSWB planning process has been one of collaboration. Collaboration with area municipalities, sector leadership, the public, as well as frontline staff and priority population groups. And the planning process itself has allowed us to reflect on the shared responsibility we all have to understanding our strengths and for finding solutions to the complex social issues facing our region. And ultimately, that we all have a piece of the puzzle that will help guide us to that bigger picture. And so today, I'm going to be walking us through the bigger picture by starting with a brief refresher on the project background, then moving on to a high-level overview of the public consultation results, and then finally concluding with an opportunity for you all to provide input on some of the regional and local priorities highlighted throughout the presentation. Next slide, please. And so, as you may recall, the approach really emphasizes the need to undertake preventative activities that are upstream from the incident or crisis itself. In Windsor-Essex, the plan has been guided by our systems leadership table, or executive leadership from across 9 different sectors, and the enhanced sector network, or committees and organizations that work alongside historically underrepresented communities. We've been taking a regional approach throughout this process, and one that will include regional recommendations as well as appendices for each municipality, consisting of a review of data, strengths and assets within that locality, as well as public consultation data. Upon council endorsement, the plan partners will then be able to work towards implementing the shared goals and strategies. And ultimately, the plan is being pursued as a living document, so one that will involve an ongoing process of issue identification and planning and collaboration. Next slide. So in this case, just wanted to highlight some of the milestones that have been completed to date. First and foremost, you'll see on the top there, and we completed an environmental scan consisting of asset mapping, a review of existing strategies, and a comprehensive review of publicly available data. The second point there, in terms of contextualizing the data, we were then able to engage our sector leadership as well as our network to ensure that we paired a qualitative understanding, or the human understanding of some of the data that was collected. We also engaged each municipality across the months of October to December of last year to ensure everyone knew the approach that we were taking, as well as engagement actually with the administration of each municipality, to ensure that we were able to connect with the appropriate organizations across our next piece, which was the public consultation phase of the project. I did want to emphasize that we completed a virtual public meetings, one for each municipality, as well as an online public survey. And actually, our discussions with the Enhanced Sector Network Group allowed us to implement recommendations from those groups right off the bat. We added things like live closed captioning for each of the meetings. Those closed captionings were also available in English, Spanish, French, and Arabic. We even added a few other opportunities, like our connection with Life After 50, to ensure that we had a teleconference opportunity for those seniors who may not be able to access the public consultation via Zoom. We also connected with our partners like Windsor-Essex Community Housing Corporation to ensure that we had print surveys available to those who may have barriers to accessing the internet or accessing the online survey. So from there, we're now in our prioritization phase. We've been able to establish regional risk and protective factors that we're going to be focusing on, based off of a review of all of the 6 inputs above: the mapping, data report, engagements, and public consultations. And today we are, as we are kind of in the midst of the priority and strategy setting, which you all will be actually helping with providing some input on. Our next steps involve measurement and report writing, as well as reporting and dissemination. Next slide, please. I've been saying risk and protective factor categories, and just as a refresher, those risk and protective factor categories are highlighted there. There are 7 in total, and we also included questions about COVID-19, as we understood that the pandemic could have an impact across each of those different categories. Across the different inputs that I was describing beforehand in blue in the last slide, we were able to align our question categories to those factor categories from the beginning. So our asset map considers these risk and protective factor categories as much as our data report and our public consultations. Next slide. As a bit of a survey summary, in total, we had over 1,500 respondents, so individuals who accessed the survey and started to complete the survey. But ultimately, we had 840 totally completed surveys. That includes 829 online surveys. From there, if you'll see, for the town of Tecumseh, we had 54 completed surveys from residents across the municipality, from the township. And in addition to that, again, as I mentioned beforehand, we had print surveys available with the Windsor-Essex Community Housing Corporation, as well as a community partnership, and H4, the Homelessness and Housing Help Hub. Next slide. I'd just like to kind of show a visual of some of the information that was coming from that. We'll dive a little bit deeper into the data, but what you'll see on your screen right now is that when we were discussing regional priorities across, across each municipality, the online survey showed that there was some consistency across the board as what the top issue was. In the case across the region, affordable and/or attainable housing was considered the top priority across each municipality. You'll also notice, though, that there are variances in terms of what other top 3 priorities were seen across the region. If you look at the Tecumseh column there, you'll notice that under housing and neighborhoods, some of the top 3 issues were affordable and attainable housing, access to affordable leisure activities, resident and community safety. Under education, you'd see employment skills development, and under financial security, things like economic or employment opportunities, as well as access to income supports and poverty. Many of the respondents from the town of Tecumseh were responding from a regional perspective as much as they were responding from a municipal perspective. But I'll dive a little bit deeper into that in the conversation with the virtual public meetings. So next slide. So through that process, we were able to have, for the town of Tecumseh, we were able to have 17 individuals register and 14 attend. And through that process, we were able to ask questions pertaining to how people understand community safety and well-being in their community, different needs or different priorities within their community as well as within the region, as well as provide some ideas in terms of strategies and supports that may be needed. And through that, we were able to garner some public remarks from individual Tecumseh residents as well as across the board. The next slide, actually, if you go to the next slide, this information consists of some public comments from across the region. So not just Tecumseh, but across the region. And really, something that became fairly obvious through the discussions of, say, for instance, housing in neighborhoods, was the emphasis of attainable housing, mainly that there was a need to look for ways that we could have our residents across Tecumseh and across the region be able to live, play, and work within their community and stay within their community. Again, some of those housing prices, as an example, may be pushing some individuals, some younger families or some youth to be unable to, for instance, afford some residence within their communities. Additionally, there was conversation about traffic safety, and this was something that came up, especially within the discussion with Tecumseh, about the need for supports on things like active transportation, like road safety for cyclists and pedestrians. In addition to being able to have that balance of being able to walk and cycle and kind of drive to work for some areas. On the next slide, you'll see some comments for the other categories. So you'll notice for mental health and substance use, individuals were indicating a need for access to services, as well as an awareness of services. From an education standpoint, understanding the impacts that things like school closures could have on youth, but also emphasizing the need to be dealing with some of the barriers that individuals may have. From a financial security standpoint, similar to the town of Tecumseh, it was about looking at having opportunities within their community to stay within their community and work from within, so as to live and work within their neighborhood. Additionally, you'll notice an emphasis discussions across vulnerable populations. And while you may have seen in the previous the slides about the regional priorities that vulnerable populations weren't considered within the top 3 ranked priorities, across all discussions from the virtual public meetings in each municipality, as well as with our enhanced sector network group and our leadership table, there was an emphasis on the need to have a review of supports for marginalized communities, priority populations, or also known as vulnerable populations. Next slide. And this is, next slide. This is some consultation data specific to the town of Tecumseh. So on the right-hand side, I'll take a little bit of a slower pace on this one because I know I'm going at a bit of a speed, but on the right-hand side, you'll see a breakdown of the survey demographic details. In this case, this is the online survey and that print survey. Again, there was 54 respondents to completed surveys for the town of Tecumseh. And included in there, again, there was an emphasis that there was an overwhelming sense of safety within the community. Again, most individuals reported that they trusted police and were satisfied with the level of policing. In addition to that, I think from a negative factor side, a risk factor side, there was a potential unsatisfaction, or there was an unsatisfaction with housing and social supports. And just like we were mentioning beforehand, some of the major themes that came from the public meeting were that of transportation, active transportation as an example, as well as housing and access to different services. So next slide, please. When we review the community priorities and we look at what were the top 3 priorities that were found through the surveying process, we found that, again, housing in neighborhoods was consistently considered the top of those top 3 priorities, Housing in neighborhoods was top, education as a second, financial security and employment as a third. You'll notice under financial security and employment, it was consistently within the top 3. Across all other categories, it was most often within the top 3. And again, when you break down some of those top issues, as we discussed in the regional priority slide, that multicolored slide, you'll see that in terms of the percentage of individuals that indicated top issues within each of those categories, affordable and attainable housing was by far the top issue. In education, employment skills development, again, by far the top issue, and employment opportunities, again, by far the top issue. In conversation, in terms of some of the public remarks, we heard from residents indicating, again, that they wanted to be able to live, work, and play within their neighborhoods. Again, that's emphasis on the leisure activities and engagement opportunities within the community. On transportation, on housing, there was an emphasis as well to see whether or not there are ways to collaborate. Again, like we said at the very beginning, from a sector perspective, from a government perspective, each of us have a piece of the puzzle that we can use to hopefully find appropriate solutions. In this case, some recommendations from the conversations we had was seeing whether or not there could be additional supports from a provincial or federal side of things. And in addition to that, I think when we're looking at access to services, again, there was a need to be looking at ways to have quicker system navigation. They use the example of a one-stop shop as an example, but looking at it as how do we support system navigation within the community? Next slide. And that again goes to where we were talking about beforehand. When people are talking about community safety and well-being, what do they mean? And so they were emphasizing a lot of the positive factors of the fact that Tecumseh is a very engaged community. You know your neighbors and they look out for one another. That was something that we heard consistently. And also indicating that, there was a number of different supports and offerings, especially from an OPP standpoint with respect to mental health supports. Under negative factors, again, you'll see that there was consistency on emphasis about traffic and road safety, and also emphasizing that there were, again, a need for that support from an affordable housing side of things. Next slide. And sorry, next slide one more time. So where does that lead us? And when we're talking about our regional priorities and opportunities, when we looked at all of the publicly available data, when we looked at the information from the public through those virtual public meetings, the online surveys, and our engagement with the leadership table and sector network groups, we found that there were 4 main priority categories that we looked at. And if we think of it as a aspirational statement, what we want to have in our region, the first is engaged and safe communities. The second, mental health and substance use supports. Third, financial security and economic equity. And fourth, good governance and data. For the first piece, we're looking at a couple of different opportunities that we could have to reach our priorities. Essentially, to reach our priorities, we need access to affordable housing to keep people living and working in their communities, and supportive and transitional housing for those without. I'll go through some of this information a bit more briefly so that it's not reading it verbatim, but other pieces are opportunities for community engagement, especially for youth, infrastructure that promotes active transportation and community safety, improved relationships between communities and the police, as well as local governments or local institutions. Under the mental health and social supports category, increase awareness and destigmatization of existing supports, reduced barriers, improved system navigation for those accessing services. And there's a keen sense there about particularly to support diverse needs and sensitivities of vulnerable or priority populations. And then lastly, in that category, improved emergency response to those in crisis. That's more of that incident response standpoint. Under the next category, financial security and economic equity, an emphasis on access to different employment skills training, those that match the different local employment opportunities that exist, aligning and leveraging existing supports for those facing poverty or financial insecurity, as well as understanding the barriers and understanding the service gaps there. And also targeted supports for systemically marginalized demographic groups and locations. And then lastly, good governance, we're looking at the discussion of removing barriers, improving representation and inclusion across CSWB governance, and improved continual community engagement. Just to showcase again, in terms of the next steps, we are still on track. We are looking at having, after these discussions, the development of the performance and outcome measurement plan, and then finally having the plan available by, hopefully, we're aiming for December 31st, but likely would be able to have this report by November. Next slide. And this is where we leave off in terms of your input as well. Some questions for discussion here, and I think what's important for us to be considering is, does this information align with your views on community safety in your community? And is there a priority that is important to safety and well-being in your community that's not on this list? Another question is in terms of how do we measure success in your community as we work to implement that? And some considerations could be had on short-term success and long-term. I understand that these questions can be very large in scope, and so if there is need for time to reflect on these prompting questions, please feel free to connect with me, and I would be happy to receive your thoughtful input via email or by phone by June 30th. And the next slide actually has my contact information. But from there, I'd like to stop the discussion. And if you'd like to see the questions on your screen, I'd just like to ask administration to please keep that last slide up if possible.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Gill, for your presentation, and that it's nice to see that the file is moving What most folks, and those in particular are watching from home or streaming, is the in-depth participation from stakeholders across the region. If I recall right, back in I think your first presentation, that there were in the neighborhood of close to 200, and continuously expanding. So it is a wide-reaching, document that certainly will touch many of the areas. So I will open it up, but with certainly questions from members of council. The only thing I'm a bit surprised in terms of our community, in particular on the mental health issue, in particular with the COVID-19, and we've seen huge, some significant rise in folks looking for, obviously, care under mental health, and we've seen it through, even through our first responders across the region, and dealing with quite an increase. And as we all know, we had an issue prior to COVID with the overdose, and especially opium, opiates, and certainly in the region. And there's been a dramatic rise, and then combination, the mental health piece and that. So I don't know how dated the survey and the information that was there, but I would surmise that that's something that's probably a point of interest with all of the municipalities.
So thank you for that question, Mr. Mayor. And quite frankly, we did have a specific question related to COVID-19. And when we talked about mental health and substance use supports, the majority of responses in relation to that was directly connected to COVID-19. As an example, in terms of some of the public remarks, a statement was, incidents of mental health and addiction have affected everyone more and young to old. It has contributed to overall isolation in the community. This was a direct quote from, this is a combination of quotes, but for brevity. But that was something in relation to the impact of COVID-19 on mental health and substance use supports. So again, absolutely, you are correct in terms of what was brought up through those conversations. The discussion of mental health was primarily focused around the impact of COVID-19 on individuals' mental health. So again, while that was not in the top 3 priority categories that were presented, it does not mean that that's not a potential issue, as you may see from that type of a remark.
Yeah, because I firmly believe as well is that in the bearing years coming moving forward, that I call it the remnants, but the post-pandemic, and as we if we get, we will get back to some normalcy, but I think there's a window of 3 to 5 years that I think is going to be very impactful in terms of the safety plan in place. But I think as we move on, I think we're going to start maybe seeing a nudge up. And you talk about the top 3, because I really believe and I know I'm wearing my county hat too, as well as in the wardens, and hearing from our EMS chief and police and certainly our fire services, is that a lot more calls now are I guess the main focus, or the main calls, are due to mental health, certainly issues. So it just some of the observations. But so I'll open it up also to members of council for comments and or questions to Mr. Gill. Consultation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And through from your comments there, if it's just a comment here, not a question, but if our officers are spending a lot more time taking care of the mental issues and the social issues in our community, they have less time to take care of our traffic issues. And, and then traffic issue becomes the priority for our citizens because our officers are, using their resources dealing with these social issues. And as indicated, these mental issues could become worse as we get away from COVID and people are being affected by it. So, I feel in policing, we need to start directing more resources to the social side of it while we still have some enforcement officers on the other side, but a lot more issues need to be dealing with the social problems. And that spin-off will eventually result in lower crime rates and better traffic enforcement, and the officers will have more time to take care of the direct issues of the community instead of dealing with mental and social issues all the time. It's just a comment I'd like to make.
All right, Councillor Altenhoff.
Thank you, Worship, and through you, thank you very much, Mr. Gill, for the presentation. Just a couple comments. First off, I would echo what the mayor indicated with regards to, I'm looking at your slide 7 of regional priorities, where you kind of color fill the various cells in that matrix, identifying, what was identified as critical things. And I am, again, consistent with what the mayor indicated, I'm surprised for Tecumseh that, we're basically voided of color in those cells. So I think it was identified, and we know that there's concerns, there's issues on that front. And with what was, just also mentioned by Councillor Tonio, and again, I think I mentioned this earlier when we were meeting previously, I hope we can integrate into this ultimate plan an incredible level of, I'll call it adaptivity, active adaptivity, where it can look and see where we're our weakest, and we will allocate the appropriate personnel, resources, whatever it is, to address those items. We recognize there's only so much that can be done with everything we have. But making sure we develop a plan that allows for that active adaptivity, I think in the long run will be beneficial for everyone. Another point that I was kind of surprised, and I think this gets to your questions, is the first question, is there something that seems to be a bit off from what you've kind of mentioned and presented? Again, looking at slide 7, I'm surprised that, at least for my Ward 1, traffic safety was, again, void or not really identified on that regional priorities. Yet in other aspects of your slides, there's kind of points where you do indicate that, yes, traffic safety, pedestrian safety, active transportation safety are quite critical. I know speeding, speeding is certainly probably the call I get most frequent. So I don't know if that was well identified, certainly in this, but I would encourage you to, hopefully, if that can get put in here, it should be, because I think that's certainly something that's quite critical. And ultimately, as you know, it will lead to better vehicular safety, better pedestrian safety, better active safety, across the board. With regards to your second question, where kind of how do we measure success? I'm probably not the expert on each of these fronts, but I would say, if you can, try your best as possible to use qualitative metrics to try to achieve that. Then we can compare numbers and see over time how we're progressing, how we're doing. Qualitative measures, although they are important, please don't get me wrong, they can be somewhat gray and vague sometimes, and not the best measures. So just to provide some input to those questions you asked, I hope that's helpful. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, I just wanted to add and clarify a few points. But first off, thank you very much for your comments and your question, because I think, quite frankly, you're absolutely correct. I mean, the approach that we took was to try to marry the quantitative, that survey type approach, the number side of things, with the qualitative. And that's why it was so important for us to do that. Was quite frankly, the quantitative side, the online survey, didn't show that mental health and substance use was considered a priority, but the qualitative side did, and especially with respect to how COVID-19 may be exacerbating some of those challenges and those issues. So being able to have both of those pieces of information it gives us a fuller image of it. And quite frankly, so in terms of the slide 16 that has the regional priorities and opportunities, those are the approaches, those are the priorities that we are looking to kind of pursue as part of this plan. And it does include aspects of mental health and substance use supports that would still be tied to supports that may be recommended or discussed through the town of Tecumseh as an example, right? But I think that is something that it was really important for us to be able to indicate and see via that both of those types of data sets.
All right, anyone else? Councillor Dowie.
Thank you, Worship. I just wanted to really thank Mr. Gill for what's been organized. I had a great time participating in the meetings that we had online a few weeks ago, and certainly learned a lot and listened to many residents in the community about what they saw and how they felt. I think it was a very worthwhile endeavor, and thank you for the data presented tonight. I look forward to seeing the next steps.
All right. If there's nothing further at this juncture, I certainly want to take this opportunity to thank you, Mr. Gill, for certainly the update. I think this is a very, very critical document. I think that will go a long way, and not only for our region, for our community, our town, and so forth, but the region as a whole, because public safety has no borders, and you know, a lot of the services that we provide our community are co-joined with many of our other communities, especially on like the social services, a lot of our first responders, the housing piece, all of that are regionally delivered. So I think it's very timely, and I'm looking forward to continue to see the evolution of this document, and then the final presentation to certainly Tecumseh and in the county as well. So with that, thank you for certainly your leadership in this program, and looking forward to again advancing. I think a very, very solid document.
Great, thank you all very much. It's very much appreciated, your confidence. Take care.
All right, take care. So members of council, if I could have a motion that the PowerPoint presentation entitled Windsor Essex Regional Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan, Town Tecumseh Update presentation, as listed on the Tuesday, June 8, 2021 Special Council Agenda meeting be received as presented. Councillor Altenhoff, Councillor Tonio. All in favor? Opposed, if any, that's carried. There is no communications or no further reports that be presented. So therefore, if there's no further questions or comments, then adjournment is in order. Councillor Tonio and Councillor Houston. All in favor? Opposed, if any, that is carried. We've got roughly